I want to talk just briefly today about resistance and what resistance is, where it really comes from. It's a really short reading today and a really short lesson, to be honest with you. And you actually are not going to need to know any of the equations in today's reading. I forget if the daily problem for this one has maybe an equation in it, but really you don't need to know the equations. There's equations for resistance and resistivity that you can actually calculate how much resistance a given bit of wire ought to have and things like that. Honestly, I don't think that's really important to know. What is important by the end of today is to understand what resistance really is. Resistance is really shorthand for resistance to current flow. Okay? So if we have a battery and we have a wire and then the international symbol for a resistor, the resistor just impedes the flow of current. Current wants to flow like this. Okay? But when it hits the resistor, it's got to be slowed down. Now, the way current works is if it's slowed down here, it's slowed down all along the wire. The reason for that is basically you can't let it go slower in here than everywhere else because you get a traffic jam. But it basically resists the flow of the current. If that resistor were not there, the current would flow far more freely. If we put a bigger resistor in here, instead, we would have even more resistance to flow, and so there would be less flow. But what is resistance? Where does it really come from? Well, it comes from a lot of different things. Partly, it comes from defects within the metal or whatever other substance is carrying the current. Any crystalline lattice defects, for example, if you have a perfect crystal lattice, that's going to be better at conducting electricity typically than an imperfect crystal lattice. So any bit of thermal energy that knocks one of the nuclei a little bit out of position will create problems. Any kinds of outside contaminants in the metal, and you almost always get some. A little bit of carbon in your copper, for example, or something like that, will generally decrease the conductivity and increase the resistance to flow. Also, as things heat up, they typically have the resistance go up. More and more thermal energy means the nuclei are bouncing around a little bit more, and they're kind of getting in the way of things. But there's also a couple other things that clearly affect resistance that we should think about. I'm going to go to my favorite analogy for electricity, which is water pipes. If we have water pipes, okay, I like to think of the voltage, the battery is like a pump that's moving water uphill, okay, into our pipes, okay, and then it's going to go downhill, G, okay, okay. In this pipe, this is where the resistor is going to be. There's several different things we can do to change the resistance. First thing we can do is screw up what's going on inside the pipe. Okay? If we make the walls of the pipe rough, okay, it's kind of like a clogged artery there a little bit. Or if we make it, put a lot of debris in here, a lot of little pebbles and things, water is not going to flow as freely through here. This is like changing either the metal or the sort of quality of the metal. I'm assuming the conductor's metal here. But there's a couple other things we can do to change the resistance of our wire here. For example, let me just erase this real quick. We can change, if we have to use the same metal, say we've only got copper to work with or something, we have other choices. Okay? One thing we can do is to make the pipe thicker. Thicker pipe will mean more flow. You get more room for the water to go through, and you should therefore get less resistance. Conversely, if we go to a narrow pipe, that should be a high resistance. We've pinched the water tight. It's got to squeeze through there, and there's just going to be more resistance. If you want to think of it this way, every bit of the water in the middle is feeling the edges more, and the drag from the edges more than they were before. We talked about this a little bit last semester in fluids. Okay? What else could we do? I'm going to go back to my standard sized pipe, all the way down. What else could we change? Well, we could actually, if we wanted to, make the pipe longer. What's the effect of this? Well, the water has to go through this pipe further, which means there's more room for it to drag, and therefore it's going to feel more resistance to flow, okay? And again, we saw this last semester with Poisson flow. Poisson, remember? There was a bit about pressure over length of the pipe divided by, there was an eta in here, there was an 8 pi somewhere, possibly here. Can't remember if it's a numerator or denominator. And there was also a function of the radius of the pipe squared, or to the fourth rather. Okay? We're going to have something similar here, not identical, but similar. Okay? If we make the pipe longer, the flow rate goes down. The current has to go down. If we make the sides of the pipe bigger, the flow rate goes up. Not quite by r to the fourth, but it still goes up in current situation. Okay? It's got more to do with the area in that case than it does with fluids dragging in the walls at all. But this is what affects the resistance, okay? So remember, resistance is resistance to current flow, okay? And what affects it is things like the quality of the conductor, but also the length and the thickness. Lots of thickness is good for allowing lots of flow through. Lots of length is bad because you have to go through it for longer, okay? What you should be thinking about right now, and I'm not going to answer this just yet, is if the current is going through, and it's got to lose a certain amount of energy as it goes around, okay, because that's what the voltage tells you. If we increase the resistance, what does that mean about where that energy is going, okay? I'm not going to answer this now. We'll talk about it next class. But for now, have yourselves a great evening. I'll see you in class.